Good morning, everyone. Let me say it's great to see all of you here this morning, and welcome to the 2010 Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's Annual Legislative Conference. On behalf of the distinguished CBCF Board of Directors, staffs, and volunteers, it is indeed our privilege to unveil this year's National Town Hall meeting. We have this Town Hall meeting, and our theme is Educating Our Way to Prosperity. We extend a warm thank you to our sponsors, Toyota, whose ongoing support for this event made it possible for another year. We also thank our friends at Black Entertainment Television, BET, for webcasting this important session. Consistent with our unbridled pursuit of liberty and justice for all Americans, the entire 2010 Annual Legislative Conference is centered around scribing comprehensive solutions and mounting pathways to parity. Across this great nation, we are witnessing hope being dashed by record unemployment, bottomless foreclosures, and near bankrupt government. It is evident that the changes we need will not emerge overnight, nor will it manifest itself without the federated support of all of you here. Coupled with the legislative fortitude of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and the progressive programs designed by the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, education and jobs are at the center of this morning's dialogue. All of us in this room recognize that important is the passport to success and opportunity. It is indeed a prerequisite for prosperity. However, Americans' educational system, once heralded as a global model, is not consistently earning a passing grade. Without a solid educational foundation, securing a good-paying job is impossible. With millions of unemployed or underemployed, Americans must now reassess their career trajectory. Prompted by the burgeoning economic recovery, key business sectors are positioning to produce new jobs. This morning, we will examine the success of the educational system and the changes needed to prepare and position African Americans to win the new jobs to come. As a companion to the CBCF's fight for educational parity, members of the CBC are working to craft and pass legislation that will achieve this goal. At the helm of the CBC leadership, she is a modern-day freedom fighter, a true advocate of the people. Please join me in welcoming the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, representing the 9th District of the great state of California, Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Good morning, and welcome to the Educating Our Way to Prosperity Town Hall meeting. As chair of the 42 members of the Congressional Black Caucus, the conscience of the Congress, I humbly thank you for your presence here today and your astuteness to the needs of families and communities across America. Throughout the 111th Congress, members of the CBC have worked dutifully to pen legislation that will create pathways out of poverty, stabilize our fragile economy, and also to present real opportunities for all. Whether promoting educational reinvestment in low-income and disadvantaged communities and communities of color, increasing access to economic security, eliminating health disparities, providing equitable housing options, strengthening civil rights and judicial reform, or addressing global poverty. The Congressional Black Caucus is serving as a conduit for change. The CBC has authored meaningful legislation reflective of the need to ensure that the underserved and disadvantaged Americans are placed at the forefront, mind you, at the forefront of the federal agenda and also the intervention strategies. We know the change that we so desperately need cannot and will not occur in isolation. So we encourage you to continue to be engaged. Visit our website, www.thecongressionalblackcaucus.com. ALC.com. Organize, energize, and mobilize your communities. And speaking of strategic partnerships, I'm immensely proud to share the mantle of leadership with our great leader, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, Congressman Donald Payne. Our foundation's president, Dr. ALC Scott, and this year's ALC co-chairs Congressman Elijah Cummings, representing the 7th District of Maryland, and Congresswoman Diane Watson, representing the 33rd District of California. Collectively, they have shouldered an awesome task of balancing the necessity for meaningful dialogue with the real deliberate urgency of direct and swift action. So I want to thank all of you for coming to Washington this weekend. I want to thank you for your service, and I want to thank you for the sacrifices that you're making in your communities. And I want to thank each of you again for your support of the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Thank you again.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the president of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, Dr. ALC Scott.
Welcome to our 40th Annual Legislative Conference, and thank you for your attendance. Today we are honored to host one of the high points of our conference, a conversation about education, an examination of the negative effects that an inferior education can have on children, families, communities, and the country alike. Studies have shown that education is an economic issue. When we don't have proper education, we will have higher unemployment. Suffice it to say that the inability to compete in the marketplace is often a precursor to crime, homelessness, and other societal blemishes. So today we've assembled a very esteemed panel to help us strategize on how to break this chain and redirect future generations down a path of promise and prosperity. I want to thank our expert panel for taking the time to be with us today. This morning, as we convene, it is a little difficult for some of us because the person who was supposed to moderate our panel was Dr. Ron Walters. And as most of you know, that he passed away on Friday. He was an integral part of the foundation and the CBC, and we were really looking forward, and he was really looking forward to moderating this panel as well as preparing a white paper that you would have received today. So I would just like for us to stop a moment and just remember him, a moment of silence. Thank you. This morning's dialogue could not be possible without the hard work demonstrated by our board of directors, our staff, our fellows, as well as the numerous volunteers, the volunteers from Capitol Hill and the other volunteers. Many of them, I was talking with one volunteer who has been volunteering for 15 years. So we thank them because we wouldn't be able to do this. I would not be able to put on this conference with 30 staff members. So we recruit a lot of volunteers. We're also thankful to our sponsors because we would not be able to offer all the things that we offer you if we did not have good corporate partners in this venture. I would like for you to take advantage of all the workshops that we'll have to offer throughout the rest of the conference, and also to visit our exhibit area. We have an exhibit showcase that includes a job fair, and it's open from 8 in the morning to 9 o'clock at night on today and tomorrow, and on Saturday it will close at 1 p.m. All conference registrants are asked to swipe your electronic business cards before select sessions. In these sessions, we'll be able to capture the information that you have given us with your registration, and it will allow us to continue to contact you and be in touch with you throughout the year. We're trying to move into the 21st century. And also, to improve your experience here, especially for many of the younger people, we are now on Facebook and Twitter, so please follow us. There will be live blogs and interactive features designed to engage the community and to expand the dissemination of vital information shared throughout the conference. I think I heard somebody say it's not just for young people. So, no, because I'm on Facebook also, and I'm not so young. Okay. At this time, I would like to bring to the stage Jim Colin, who's the Vice President of Marketing and Communication, and he's representing Toyota, who's our sponsor for this event today. Welcome, Mr. Colin. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Good morning, and very briefly, thank you, Dr. Scott. On behalf of Toyota's 30,000 U.S. employees, I would like to thank the CBC Foundation for allowing us to be part of today's discussion about the many educational challenges that are facing our nation in the years ahead. So we appreciate being here. We take education very seriously at Toyota, and we are very glad to be a part of the discussion today. Thank you.
Please greet the co-chairs of this year's annual legislative conference, Congresswoman Diane Watson and Congressman Elijah Cummings.
Good morning, and greetings, and a huge welcome to the 2011 ALC National Town Hall Meeting. Serving as the co-chairs of this year's annual legislative conference has presented a stellar opportunity for both Congressman Cummings and myself to create a remarkable synergy between grassroots advocacy, public policy, legislative power, at a time when the American dream has been deferred for many due to our depressed economy, bleak job markets, and beleaguered educational structure. The Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation are determined to engineer forums, workshops, and plenary sessions that move beyond rhetoric to actual remedies. Throughout this week, you will have the opportunity to participate in a myriad of pressing topical conversations guided by critical thinkers and industry experts. So this morning's meeting is one of a bevy of thought-provoking dialogue that will illustrate the impact of our present-day challenges and mobilize us all to become ambassadors of change and walking billboards for equally high-quality education for all of our children. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Come on, we can do better than that. Good morning, everyone. It is certainly my honor and my privilege to be here this morning, and I want to thank every single one of you for being a part of this town hall meeting. I say to my constituents all the time that this is the greatest country in the world. And while we may be going through our economic problems right now, this storm will end soon. But the question is not whether the storm will end. That's not the question. The question is who will have your job? Will you have your health care? Will you have your house after the storm is over? And that's what this town hall meeting is all about, empowering people so that they can figure out what they need to do to weather this very difficult storm. And this morning, we are honored to be joined by a distinguished panel of seasoned scholars, experts, and distinguished activists. The conductors of this morning's Symphony of Thoughts are two professionals, and they are absolutely brilliant professionals. Congresswoman Gwen Moore, Wisconsin. Yeah. I see we got the Wisconsin delegation in the house. But Congresswoman Gwen Moore of Wisconsin will moderate the first panel, which will focus on education. And Dr. Maya Rockeymoore, President of Global Policy Solutions, who is a double alum of the CBCF and a former distinguished fellow and previous Vice President of Research and Programs, will moderate the second panel centered around jobs. And so we've tried to combine the two, education and jobs, because, ladies and gentlemen, it'll come up during the panel discussions. A lot of people who are losing their jobs or have lost their jobs, those jobs aren't coming back. And so we've got to do some educating and retraining. And so we are very, very pleased to have you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming my distinguished colleague from the state of Wisconsin, Congressman Gwen Moore.
Well, good morning, and I want to thank my great colleagues, Ambassador Watson and Representative Cummings, for this great introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's town hall meeting will address the inescapable correlation between inferior educational training and the pervasive unemployment rates that we face, given the mismatch of skill sets and employers' needs. In order for America to remain an enterprising global brand for business, training, and development, we absolutely must afford every child access to a high-quality public education, which will enable them to compete and excel in the job marketplace. We've assembled some of the leading authorities to help us examine our present-day challenges and identify achievable solutions. In an effort to further engage and empower our friends and supporters, we invite you to participate in the annual legislative conference conversation via Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We welcome photos, videos, and written accounts of your ALC experience. Additionally, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation staff will be answering your tweets in real time during the entire conference. You'll find us at all three social networking destinations under the username CBCF Inc., INC. Our first panel, we've been joined by United States Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan. Where are you, Mr. Secretary? Voila, Mr. Secretary. Welcome. Congressman Donald Payne, a member of the House Committee on Education and Labor and this year's co-chair of the ALC. Congressman Payne. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus from California. And Mr. Payne, of course, is from New Jersey. Congressman Bobby Scott, member of the House Committee on Education and Labor from Virginia.
Okay, all the way down.
Okay. Mr. Mark Morial, Chief Executive Officer of the National Urban League. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Dr. James Comer, founder and chairman of the School Development Program at Yale University School of Medicine Children's Study Center. Dr. Michael Lomax, President and CEO of United Negro College Fund. Welcome. Dr. Sidney Ribot, President of Howard University. And Ms. C. Diane Wallace Booker, Esquire, Executive Director of U.S. Dream Academy, Inc. And as I promised you, this is a very distinguished panelist. I'm going to allow each of our panelists to give us a 30-second, what a challenge, but I know the members of Congress are accustomed to this. I thought I saw Dr. Guevara. Yes. Yes. I thought I saw you earlier. Dr. Jonathan Guevara, Chief Executive Office of the Community College of the District of Columbia. I would like, this is the challenge, we'll see how smart they all are, to give us the 30-second version of their vision for providing educational opportunity in this environment, because of course the global brand that Americans have established for having the highest and most qualified and most educated workforce has been blemished in recent times. So, starting with, how will we do this? Starting with Secretary Duncan, Congressman Payne, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, Congressman Bobby Scott, and then I guess we should put Mr. Guevara back in his place there, and then Mr. Morial, Dr. Comer, Mr. Michael Lomax, Dr. Ribot, and last but certainly not least, Ms. Diane Wallace, Esquire. Please give us 30 seconds. Thank you. I think you're all mic'd up, and you will be heard.
We need great early childhood education programs. We need elementary and middle and high schools with the highest of expectations. We need much more parental engagement and involvement and community involvement. We need great wraparound services. We have to continue to support our HBCUs and our community colleges and expand college access. This is all about what you do after high school. And this is the civil rights issue of our generation. We have far too many of our young people today who don't have a chance to chase the American dream because they don't get a great education. And together we have to challenge the status quo.
I'm Congressman Donald Payne, and I'm a member of the Education and Labor Committee. And so for the past 22 years, I've been involved in trying to make our educational system better. The topic today, of course, educating our way to prosperity, is extremely timely. And let me congratulate Secretary Duncan for the many innovative programs that he's brought, Race to the Top, others, and this President Obama's administration has made education the forefront of their administration. We need to have investment from birth. We know that I think by the third year of life, it's too late to start. You've got to start at birth, even prenatal. The music that women listen to has an impact on the unborn child. So when we thought that junior high was the time, we thought that perhaps grade 6, we had to catch them at grade 4. We have to catch them at age 1 day. And so I'm here to participate as we move towards education and prosperity, especially in the African American community.
Thank you very much. I serve on the Appropriations Committee, the Subcommittee on Labor, Health, and Human Services, which is the subcommittee that funds all of our educational programs, along with Congressman Jesse Jackson, Jr. from the great state of Illinois. Let me just say a couple of things about our work on that subcommittee to fund education. Our job quite frankly, is to reorder our funding priorities so that we can fund and use your tax dollars to fund education rather than funding the building of prisons. We want to create and we intend to crack this pipeline from cradle to prisons, and we intend to make education a funding priority, which the Obama administration has a centerpiece of its entire agenda. We must focus on the jobs of the future and continuing education, and the Congressional Black Caucus continues and will continue to fight for jobs for our young people and workforce training and continuing education, because we have a green industry, a healthcare sector, IT. We have jobs that are being created in sectors that our young people are not, quite frankly, and our older people aren't educated for. And so continuing education, workforce training is a critical component of educating our way into prosperity. And thank you again, Congresswoman Moore.
Thank you very much, and good morning. I serve on the Education and Labor Committee, but I also chair the Crime Subcommittee. So as Barbara says, we have a choice. We can provide the funding for education and job training, or we could wait until they mess up and build prisons. One of the things that we have noticed is a compelling problem, the achievement gap, where we acknowledge that we are educating some children to the 12th grade and others just to the 8th, 9th, and 10th grade. Brown v. Board of Education pointed to the idea that you cannot deny children of the minority race of an equal educational opportunity, and when you educate some to the 12th and some to the 8th, 9th, and 10th, that is obviously denying those an equal educational opportunity. When we had litigation on special education, we found that the special ed students are entitled to a free and appropriate education, and it doesn't matter what it costs. So if it costs a little extra to eliminate the achievement gap, we just have to pay it. Otherwise, you are violating their civil rights. And we also have to deal with the dropout rate, where some schools are running 50% dropout, and yet they're able to achieve adequate yearly progress, AYP. That's wrong. If you got a 50% dropout rate, that is not adequate. We have to change that. We can change that by making the appropriate investments up front, making sure that young people get on the right track and stay on the right track. That's why we're supporting the Youth Promise Act, which makes investments early on to get young people on the right track and keep them on the right track, rather than let them follow what the Children's Defense Fund calls the cradle to prison pipeline. We can change that to a cradle to college or cradle to the workforce pipeline. It's cheaper, more humane, and it's consistent with civil rights. Thank you.
Good morning. I serve as the Chief Executive Officer for the Community College of the District of Columbia, and we've been in existence for just over a year now. In 1 year, we have seen our student base increase by over 45%. And what that suggests to me is that there has been a pent-up demand in this city, like there has been across the country, for education, particularly at the higher ed level. But we face, as with many large urban centers, major issues: the lack of college readiness from our high school graduates, adults who are functionally illiterate, and in Washington, D.C., we have the tale of two cities. On one end, we have the highest number of individuals by percentage, 47%, who are baccalaureate ready or better, and on the other hand, 37% who can barely read at the 5th grade level. If this is the case across the country, then we have significant challenges to deal with. Some of the things that we're proposing and that I would propose that we consider: for adults, we have to accelerate the education process. We can no longer sit back and hope that an adult who is 35 years old will take 4 years to complete or 3 years to complete a degree. We also need to think very carefully about making education more relevant to young people. We need to use technology, use a lot of technology enhancements to make sure that what we're doing is we're getting people in and out and reducing the cost of doing so. We need to push the pre-K through 20 agenda. And if we're going to help the president reach the goal, the 2020 goal of increasing the number of degrees granted, we absolutely need to focus on those adults who do not have college degrees. If we focus only on young people, we're not going to get there.
Right. First of all, good morning. I'm Mark Morial. I'm proud to lead the National Urban League, one of the nation's historic civil rights organizations. And we serve 2.1 million people a year, including 250,000 kids in early childhood and after-school programs. How many of you, raise your hand, completed high school? And how many of you completed college? And I see a majority of the hands, almost everyone in this room raised their hand. We cannot be satisfied until every child in this nation finishes high school, has an opportunity to go to college, and our objective ought to be that every child, especially every black child, have that opportunity to do that. What I want to talk about today, and what I hope we talk about, is not only what the problems and the challenges are, because it's not a challenge, it's an emergency. What I hope we can talk about is what the goals ought to be. One point I'll leave with you, and I'll come back to this. In the last 10 years, the budget of the Department of Defense has increased by 119%. 119%. Imagine an America where in a 10-year period, we doubled spending on education. Imagine an America like that. So we need to talk about what our future ought to be about, and that's a discussion today, I think, about what our priorities ought to be about. So thank you for having me, and congratulations to Barbara Lee and the Congressional Black Caucus. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Jim Comer. I've been working for 43 years in school reform and the method in which we focused on supporting the development of young people, and we turned around schools in doing so. Given our challenging history, we have a disproportionate number of young people who have grown up in multi-problem families, multi-problem schools, and multi-problem communities. Those children, along with many of the children who've grown up in good circumstances, face special challenges as African-American students in schools. And we've focused on how to make it possible for them to be successful. Many of those children, despite their difficult circumstances, could be successful if we had teachers and administrators who had the preparation that will enable them to create school cultures that would promote the student development for those who are underdevelopment, that would lead to good academic outcomes and preparation for life. One of the problems that we have is that through no fault of their own, many schools of education are not focusing on the promotion of development and the application of development. That means that we have teachers who go into schools, too many teachers and administrators who go into schools who cannot create the culture that's absolutely necessary for our children to be successful. And that is a very serious problem, and the cause, really a major cause, of the disparities in education between African Americans and other groups. Most reform does not address this issue, and it is one of the things that needs to have attention. Even quality, improving teacher quality, focuses more on curriculum instruction and development rather than on creating the culture that supports development. And that's one of the things that we can change. One of the things we must change, because unless we can help children who were not prepared for school succeed in school, then the African American community will continue to lose ground, and the country will continue to lose ground to countries that are paying more attention to the development of their students.
Good morning. I'm Michael Lomax, President and CEO of the United Negro College Fund. Today, as we sit here in this auditorium, 3 million African Americans are pursuing some post-secondary education across this nation. If last year's numbers hold out, by this spring, about 140,000 of them will earn a bachelor's degree. So to educate our way to prosperity as a community and as a nation, we must double the number of African Americans who achieve a college degree. I believe that about 300,000 students a year should achieve a college degree from the African American community by the end of the decade. A college degree is the foundation for and the ladder to economic prosperity, on average ensuring about $1 million over a lifetime in increased earnings as a result of earning that degree. It provides the skills, the habits of mind, the knowledge needed to succeed in this global economy. Doubling our African American college graduates is the goal of UNCF, of HBCUs, and must be the goal of the nation. We rely on the guidance, the wisdom, and the political determination of this caucus and of this Obama administration, and I might add Arne Duncan's administration in the Department of Education, to achieve our educational goals, whether it's supporting historically black colleges, increasing Pell Grants to low-income students, or removing predatory lenders and providing for direct lending to college students. UNCF wants to express its deep appreciation to the caucus and to this administration for the progressive actions they've taken and in setting the goal of doubling the number of American college graduates over the next decade. But as we do that as a community, we need to focus in on ensuring that among that doubled numbers of college graduates are doubling the numbers of African Americans. That will improve the health and vitality of the African American community and add immeasurably to the health and vitality of this nation.
I'm Sidney Ribeau, President of Howard University. Let me begin by saying, first of all, that we will meet President Obama's 2020 goals. We will meet those goals. We have 100+ HBCUs, a myriad of other institutions who are focused on creating a pipeline for success, and it will happen. I come to this discussion with a unique perspective, I believe. I have taught in high school, I've taught adult education, I've taught at a community college, and I've taught at four different universities. Why I mention that is that from experience, we know what works. We know what works in pre-K to 12 education. It's out there. What we need to do, and what I want to talk about today, is how do we replicate the models of success? The reason that all of you are here today, and when Mr. Morial asked how many of you have graduated from high school or college, raise your hands, is because of schools, because of teachers, because of people that believed in you. We know the models that work. The challenge is to replicate those models, disseminate those models, and create teachers that work well within those models. So we can do it, we will do it. With the help of the caucus, with the help of the Obama administration under the leadership of Secretary Duncan, this is an accomplishable task. The social emotional environment that we create for our students to be successful in school will help them be successful in life. I'm excited about being here. I think that this is a task that is achievable. It is a mission that is impossible. Thank you.
Diane Wallace Booker, the Executive Director for the U.S. Dream Academy, and we work primarily with children of parents incarcerated in high-risk communities around the country and working in Title I schools. When you think about where we are in this country, we have an incredible opportunity, as Dr. Ribeau has said, for education reform and for meeting these really audacious goals that the Obama administration has set out. But we also have to think about where we are. Every kid is not starting from the same perspective. We have 35% of our black children are living in poverty, not just poor, but they are living in poverty, which is defined as $20,000 a year for a family of 4. 1 in 9 of our young black men are in prison. That's a full 10% of our black men ages 20 to 34 who are in prison, who will be coming out, who will need education, who will need jobs. So we think about education reform, we have to think about how we create more accessible pathways to excellence in education for all of our children. Everybody's going to be starting at a different starting point. Education is a very personal experience. We all learn in different ways. We take in that education and that knowledge and internalize and experience it differently. And so we have a big system, and we're trying to do it in a very cookie-cutter way. But when you're working with children who are dealing with trauma, with depression, with a parent who's out of the home due to incarceration or other issues, we have to think about how inside the school building we really can engage these young people, keep them in school, help them to graduate high school, to be able to go on to educate our way to prosperity. So finding ways to make education personal, to make it about the whole child, and really preparing our teachers to educate in a way where they're really understanding youth development issues, issues around children who are dealing with significant issues in their home life, and how we make it real and meaningful for them.
As I promised you, we have a very distinguished panel here today. The person who is not here today, who we had planned to be a moderator at our town hall meeting, is Dr. Ron Walters, a very, very, a scholar, a gentleman, someone who was a prolific author, lecturer, and always was a great networker in terms of organizing our major institutions in the Black community, think tanks around issues of education and job opportunity. Dr. Ron Walters passed away last Friday, and I'm asking that we just observe a moment of silence here right now. Thank you. We bring his energy into this discussion. Wow, a whole lot has gone on here. So let me try to, I have lots of questions here, but let me, given the short time frame we have, let me try to divide this into two discussions. We have experts, they've talked about everything. K through 12 education, the prison pipeline, the role of community colleges, the role of historically Black colleges and universities, early childhood development, the need for technology and technical education, schools of education and teacher training have been addressed. So let's start out with the discussion of K-12. And so the first question I'd like to pose to the panel is, in the reauthorization of the ESEA, the Elementary Secondary Education Act, there has been a lot of discussion among members of the CBC about possible elements of this reauthorization. I'd like to ask a question with the panelists keeping these elements in mind. What are some of the must-haves to be included in a reauthorized legislation? Some of the stuff from the previous No Child Left Behind legislation that we need to remove or reconsider. And of course, the question of disparity, of funding, what is the definition of a highly effective teacher, and of course, how the prison pipeline, school to prison pipeline could be addressed through the reauthorization. Certainly, this would be an opportunity to talk about early childhood development programs with respect to ESEA. So, that's a bite size, but in order to get a full conversation, I think we need to talk about the reauthorization of ESEA, what should be in there, what should be taken out, how do you address inequitable funding, what the heck is a highly effective teacher, how do we address the prison pipeline issues, and what should we be doing in early childhood development? So I know you took all that down, right? I was about to volunteer the secretary to start.
I'll start. So a couple thoughts. What I will always give the previous administration credit for was shining a spotlight on the nation's achievement gap. I think as a country, we used to like to sweep that under the rug. It presents some brutal truths. Folks often don't want to confront those, but the idea of disaggregating data and looking at how African American children are achieving, and looking at how Hispanic students are achieving, and students who live below the poverty line, I will always give them credit for that. Having said that, I think there's a number of things in the current law that are broken. I think the current law is far too punitive. There are about 50 ways to fail and no rewards for success. I think it's far too prescriptive, sort of top-down from Washington. I think that doesn't work. It led, I don't think this was intentional, but it absolutely happened. It led to a dumbing down of standards, a reducing of standards in far too many states, including the state I'm from in Illinois. We're now lying to children and lying to families and telling them they're ready for college when they're not. And it led, one of the biggest complaints I hear as I travel around the country, everywhere, urban, rural, suburban, is it led to a narrowing of the curriculum. So how do we fix all those things? How do we change that? First of all, as we move forward with reauthorization, we have to reward excellence. We have phenomenal teachers. We have great schools. We have great school districts. We have great states. We have to shine a spotlight on those places that are raising the bar for all children, closing achievement gaps, learn from them, recognize them, replicate those successes. We have a huge opportunity to do that. Secondly, we have to be much more flexible. We need to hold people accountable to a high bar, but leave it to local educators, local teachers, local principals and parents to figure out what's best for their children. When I ran the Chicago Public Schools, I almost had to sue the U.S. Department of Education to allow me to tutor my children after school. It was absolutely crazy. I had tens of thousands of children who wanted to stay after school, who wanted to work, and I had to fight the federal government on that issue. So I want to get us out of the way there. And I want to focus on growth and gain. You asked what's an effective school, an effective teacher. If dropout rates are going from 80% to 60% to 50%, they're still too high, but that school is getting better. If dropout rates are stagnating or getting worse, we have to challenge the status quo. So where are we improving? Where are we seeing growth and recognizing that and rewarding that, providing flexibility at the local level? What we've seen across the country, this is a game changer, is we have 36 states now raising standards, common college and career-ready standards for everybody. And for the first time, a child in Mississippi will be held to the same bar as a child in Massachusetts. And that's a fundamental breakthrough in this country. And that I give great credit at the local level for folks working hard on that. And then finally, every single child needs a well-rounded education. So yes, reading and math are fundamental, they're foundational, but so is science, so is social studies, so is PE and art and dance and drama and music. In our budget, we want to put $1 billion behind what we're calling a well-rounded education. And let me just finally say, that's not just for high school students, that's got to be for our babies, our 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds, so they start to figure out what their skills are, help them develop their passions. And if we do that, then I'm convinced many more of our students will stay in school, be engaged, and go on to college.
Thank you, Secretary Duncan. We have about 15 minutes left in this panel, so I'm going to make sure that we have time to talk about post-secondary education, but I do want some more responses with regard to what ought to be in or out of ESCA. We did have some discussion of, I believe Dr. Comer talked about turnaround schools, and I know that Bobby Scott here serves also on the Judiciary Committee and the Subcommittee on Crime to talk about the prison pipeline. So I really want to dig in, and I do think we gave Secretary Duncan a little bit more time because he actually is proposing some very specific things. But we want to really get into the ESCA authorization, all the turnaround models, and disparities in education. So we want to spend about 5 more minutes on this before we start talking about post-secondary education. Dr. Comer, Mark Morial, Bobby Scott, and who else? All right. So we'll have Ms. Diane Wallace Booker. So in that order, very short answers. Dr. Comer.
Okay, every problem we talked about here, pipeline, workforce, and so on, really starts at birth. And the first chance the society has to help kids who don't is in school. And if that means we need teachers and administrators who can create the conditions at that point. And we need to focus on helping the schools of education, or wherever we're going to prepare our teachers, really help teachers understand the relationship between that development and the development of the children. And that development is what makes academic learning possible, and it makes the behavior that's necessary for 21st century success possible. And so that's where I think we have to make some changes so that that can happen.
Thank you. Urban Lee.
Yeah, thank you.
People want to clap for Dr. Comer. I'm not going to suppress you guys.
We got to get the money right.
Oops.
Nobody wants to talk about getting the money right.
Oops.
And getting the money right means determining what the optimal level of investments in elementary and secondary education we ought to have, and not a shell game of what money is politically practical, and that's dumbing down the standard. So we have to get the money right. And our voices, in a time of deficits, in a time of downward pressure on domestic spending, has to be loud to say we have got to get the money right. We can design all the fancy plans, all the best road maps, all the best architecture, and you can't fund it, and it's all a mirage and an illusion. We have got to get the money right. So, if my memory serves me correct, 20 billion or so is what the funding levels for ESA, have been in that neighborhood. We spent that much per month on the war in Iraq. See, we have got to confront the priority and value conversation that no one wants to have. And if we're going to have a first-class education system, then we've got to have first-class investments in that education system. That's number one.
All right.
Number two, we need to expand the conversation from not only elementary and secondary education, but we need to add on a comprehensive early childhood component, and I think a comprehensive higher ed and workforce and adult education.
We're going to talk about
component.
that in a few minutes because I'm under pressure as the moderator. The most hated person
I'll
here.
say, so I just want to emphasize this point because this is a thing that gets talked about when doors are closed. We have got to get the investment levels right. And we need the experts to say to us that, optimally speaking, ESEA ought to be 40, 50 million. And we got to put pressure on states to equalize the amount of money they spend per school and per child, regardless of whether it's in the inner city or a poor rural area or in the suburbs.
Thank you so much. You're so right. All right, Representative Scott.
One of the things we did when we did No Child Left Behind is we violated the principle that farmers will tell you, and that is you don't fatten a pig by weighing the pig. We did all the testing, but then we didn't do anything to actually improve the education. One of the things we need to do is to get the better teachers in the more challenging schools. And some of the simplistic ideas that are out there are actually counterproductive, like, let's say you find a bad school, fire all the teachers, which creates a situation where if you're a good teacher, why would you want to go to that school? You might get fired. If you're a bad teacher, if you can land in a good school, you'll be safe. A bad teacher at a good school is safer in terms of employment than a good teacher at a bad school. We need to make sure the incentive is to get the better teachers at the more challenging schools. We can do dropout reduction. We need to deal with the achievement gap, whatever it costs. And one of the things, getting the money straight, we're spending the money. If you look at what we're paying in some communities for social pathology like prisons, teen pregnancy-related welfare and Medicaid, and all those things that occur because we didn't make the investment, we could have made those right investments, eliminated the achievement gap, reduced the dropout rate, get young people on the right track and keep them on the right track, and saved a ton of money. Right. We've calculated that in some neighborhoods, they've got so much in prisons that if you look at what the Pew Research Center says the maximum incarceration rate that gives you any value for incarceration, some are so far above that, that if you took that extra money, counterproductive incarceration, and just distribute it to all children, you're talking about thousands of dollars a year. If you aim some states, if they aimed it at 1/3 of the children, they could spend $10,000 per child per year. And what they're wasting just in prisons, to say nothing about teen pregnancy, related Medicaid and welfare. We need to get the money straight. We're spending the money. You're going to spend it either on education and job training, or you're going to spend it on welfare and incarceration. You're going to spend more in the prison, in the cradle to college.
Thank you, Representative Scott.
Pipeline.
Last word on this topic is going to come from Attorney Diane Wallace Booker, and then we're going to go into the last rushed discussion of post-secondary education.
Consistency of leadership. I think that Congressman Scott mentioned that they fire all the teachers in a bad school. The other thing that we see happening a lot is that good principals and good teachers who are making progress seem to get moved haphazardly at the end of the year. You see 3 and 4 principals, over 3 or 4 years in a different set of staff, and particularly in schools that are already chaotic and you've got kids who already have people coming in and out of their lives, having consistent leadership and consistent teachers who are doing a good job. So if ESEA can help to put in incentives to the districts that look at how you reward and keep consistency of leadership so that when schools are on the rise, you don't all of a sudden take out the leadership there, move it to somewhere else, and then you see that same school go back down.
This is very good. Thank you very much. Last question. I'm going to try to combine a number of things. Okay, we have President Obama, the administration, with a goal of increasing the number of college graduates. We have heard that this is achievable in our opening comments. So I want to talk about the role of community colleges in achieving these goals. We certainly heard Mr. Guevara say that we've got to not just focus on young people, we've got to focus on bringing adults back in. But I know in a perfect world, we wouldn't need remediation. What is the role of things like TRIO programs, Gear Up programs, community colleges in meeting this goal, vocational and certificate programs in helping us meet this goal? And I'll start with our Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Sure, thank you very much. And let me just say, Congresswoman Gwen Moore has been such a leader in making sure that we increase the funding for Gear Up, TRIO, and Upward Bound. These are programs that are absolutely essential to educate our young people and to prepare them for the future. But secondly, it's so important that as we look at the downturn in the economy and attempt to create jobs, we have to remember that we cannot leave our communities behind and understand that the chronically unemployed, many of which are African Americans, don't have the requisite job skills or training to even qualify for the jobs that are going to exist in the future. And so what we have to do is provide for, in any jobs program, workforce training and job training initiatives so that our communities and our people can qualify for the jobs that we're going to create. Thirdly, let me just say the importance and role of community colleges, because and vocational training, not everyone may want to go to college for whatever reason. It's so important that people have skills and the knowledge and an AA degree or a certificate or the qualifications to be able to go to work on jobs, good paying jobs with benefits. And so we have to see this in a comprehensive way and follow the money. And I've just got to give everybody a charge here that when you go home, don't just go home and
forget what we're talking about today, but it's very important to go home and talk to your members of Congress, your House and Senate representatives, and tell them to support funding for education rather than funding for making wars and prisons and building bombs, because this is so critical in terms of the priorities of this country.
Okay, thank
so
you.
Do that.
I've got 6 minutes. I'm dividing it with Representative Payne, Dr. Lomax, Dr. Rabeau, and Mr. Guevara. Thank you.
Well,
so
let me just
Congressman
say,
Payne, I have 6 minutes, Professor.
Okay, I'll do it in
Don't take
60
us
seconds.
back to
Right.
the 17th century, because he is a professor now.
Thank you. I just want to mention, though, in the elementary and secondary area that what's happening in the Harlem's Children's Zone with Godfrey Kennedy. I've gone up there and have seen it. These are kind of innovative programs that we can move around. And I think we have to take good programs that are working and try to replicate them. As it relates to higher education, I think we have to take more advantage of our HBCUs, our minority-serving institutions. We have to ensure that first-time college applicants can navigate the very complicated system. Many of them are unsure of themselves. So I think that we have to really have more in many high schools, you have more recruiters for the military than you have college career counselors. It's unbelievable. And so we have to strengthen the counseling system in our high schools, but really strengthen HBCUs, community colleges, minority-serving institutions.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Lomax.
You know, I think the Secretary and the Obama administration have done an incredibly strong job in focusing the nation, well, let's give them a hand, in focusing the nation's attention on reforming education. But that focus has really been on K through 12. And frankly, as broken as the K through 12 system may be, the post-secondary system is broken as well. Too many students start and too few students finish. And, you know, I would say to the Secretary and to the caucus and to this administration that we've got to bring the same level of innovation and determination to produce results in the post-secondary level that we brought to K through 12. You know, we are spending a lot of money, but we're not always spending it wisely, and we're not always spending it with those who are doing the work. Minority-serving institutions, historically black colleges, community colleges, and Hispanic-serving institutions are doing the lion's share of the work in educating people of color in this country, but the resources aren't going to them. We use financial aid to get students in, but we don't leverage it to keep students there. We don't reward students for persistence and for retention. Too many of our students have today and will continue to have in the future the need for developmental education, remediation. And our institutions have to spend the first year or two with so many of our students fixing the skills that they didn't have. And by the time we finish that, they've run out of financial aid. So something's got to be done to change the financial aid. And too many of our students come needing the psychological and social mentoring and support that our institutions don't have the infrastructure to provide. So I want to see that same kind of race to the top, innovation being applied to minority-serving institutions, HBCUs, and those institutions which are carrying the burden of supporting and educating kids of color in this country on the post-secondary level that we see going through K through 12.
Well, Dr. Lomax, do you think that TRIO is helping to graduate some of those students?
I think TRIO can do a better job. I think that we need it, but we need to hold TRIO accountable too for results. And so, you know, I want to make sure that anybody who's getting money is delivering the goods.
That's right. Thank you so much. Dr. Rabeau.
Yeah, there is a very significant role for higher education in this whole discussion. When people talk about a highly qualified teacher and a definition for that, what I would suggest to you, the definition is not as important as what that highly qualified teacher is able to do. Yeah. What are the attributes or the skills of a highly qualified teacher? How do you know her when you see her? Is it compassion? Is it content mastery of the social science or humanities? But the first thing we need to do is to talk about what do good teachers do? What do they know? How do they feel? Do they mentor? Do they support? Do they love? Do they show compassion? Are they organized? But we need to talk about what really are the attributes of effective instruction in K through 12 and in higher education in general. Well, why TRIO programs work, and I used to work in an upward bound program, is because we believed in those kids. Mm-hmm. We believed in them probably more than they believed in themselves, but when they left, they believed in themselves more than we did. So one thing that HBCUs do, and have done historically, all 105 HBCUs, is creates an environment where students can discover his or her own success, their passion, their intelligence, and their ability. If you look at African American males as a population, what you find is that there are programs that succeed with African American males. Dr. Comer is very familiar with them, has developed many of them, and one of the things that works is allowing those students to know that they can be successful and they're valued because society doesn't value them.
Okay, thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Jonathan Guevara.
I could spend the next day talking about this issue.
You ain't got the next day.
All right. I'll take half of it then. But the likelihood of going to college, if you have some college in high school, is high. The likelihood of going to college and finishing college, if you do between 12 to 15 credits while you're still in high school, is almost 100%. Mm-hmm. So part of the question is, why aren't we collaborating more with our high schools to assure that those young people who show the propensity for college-level work do not have that opportunity? Cost is a major factor for all but maybe a very, very small percentage of the entire country. And starting in high school with dual enrollment, attending a community college, is a big part of that solution. Unfortunately, we get back to the money issue. Community colleges have become the all things to all people, and they're grossly under-resourced. We talk about things like TRIO and Upward Bound and the whole Pell Grant financial aid system. And we've put a lot of money, increased resources into education. But the reality is, those dollars do not help Mr. Duval or Mr. Jefferson, or particularly somebody like Mr. Rimmer. And these are all our students. Mr. Rimmer is one day away from being homeless, while he is this close to completing his degree. And financial aid is not going to solve that problem as it's traditionally being done. So he's lost his job, and he's going to also lose, potentially, an opportunity to finish higher education. CEOs for Cities, a research group, has done the work, and if we increase the educational attainment by just 1% across the nation, we will realize over $20-some billion in added value to this economy. The dollars are there. We've got to find ways to redefine it. We've got to find ways to change that. And then in terms of the prison to pipeline issue, I'm going to close out here. In an era when we have background checks, credit checks, drug tests, checks for tests, tests for checks, when you bring somebody out of prison after educating them and they're faced with the myriad of all of these tests, then you've got to ask yourself if there are other policies that we need to be looking at, because many organizations will not hire the formerly incarcerated.
Thank you very much. Now, before I introduce the second panel of the day, moderated by Dr. Maya Rockeymoore, we're going to hear more about the linkages about what we've been discussing and how we want to make sure that African Americans are able to compete in and win good jobs in the new economy. We're going to keep the secretary here on the hot seat, but we're going to hear from the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus for 30 seconds wrap up.
I just wanted to introduce a couple of members who have arrived since we started this great town meeting. First, Congressman Shaka Fattah from the state of Pennsylvania, who actually started Gear Up and TRIO and is a member of the Appropriations Committee and made sure we have an equity commission now in education. And Congresswoman Yvette Clarke from New York, who is a leader on workforce training, job training, and as such a great whip of the Congressional Black Caucus that keeps us all together. I believe all members now have been introduced. Of course, Congresswoman Diane Watson and Congressman Elijah Cummings, who are co-chairing this weekend, and I think those are the members who I see. And I just want to thank you again very much, Congresswoman Moore, for giving me the moment to introduce our great members.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a photo up so everybody come down.
Let's give our panelists another hand. Another round of applause. Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Maya Rocky-Moore. I am President and CEO of Global Policy Solutions. I feel very passionately about the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, having one spin, a Congressional Black Caucus Fellow myself, but also having been the Vice President of Research and Programs at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation in my history. What we're talking about here today, education, is so vitally important for our communities, but also for the future of this country. We know from U.S. Census Bureau statistics that African Americans, Latinos, and other people of color will become a majority of the population in a few short decades. That means that the quality of education that our young children are getting will dictate and determine the economic prosperity, not only for our families, but for our country. And with that, we are pleased that the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, has agreed to stay here to have a brief dialogue. This position is so important for the future of our country. Thank you so much, Secretary. With that, I think that many people are concerned about, are our schools actually preparing our students to be competitive in the 21st century economy? Can you talk about dropout factories and also the skills that will be needed for the 21st century economy?
Everybody here knows that if you drop out of high school today, there are no good jobs, none, in the legal economy for a high school dropout. There are basically no good jobs if you only have a high school diploma. You have to have some form of higher education. Four-year universities, two-year community colleges, trade, technical, vocational training. After high school, you have to be taking that next step in your education journey. So when we have, as a nation, a dropout rate of 25%, that's 1.2 million students each year leaving our schools for our streets, that is morally unacceptable and it's economically unsustainable. And let me break those numbers down a little bit further. Talk about that dropout rate. We have about 2,000 high schools in our country, not that many, 2,000 high schools that produce almost half our nation's dropouts, and almost 75% of our dropouts from the minority community are African American, Latino young boys and girls. Where that is happening, we as educators, we're perpetuating poverty, and we're perpetuating social failure, and we have to do some things very, very differently. And it doesn't just, not just a high school problem, it starts in elementary, and we talked a lot about early childhood education, which is so hugely important, but at the end of the day, we have to get that dropout rate down to 0 as fast as we can. We have to get those graduation rates up to 100%, and we have to make sure every single high school graduate is college and career ready. What skills are needed moving forward in the 21st century? You need to be able to think critically. You need to be able to work as part of a team. You need to be able to work in diverse environments. This is an international, globally competitive economy. We have to prepare students with those skills.
So the dropout factories have common characteristics, correct?
The dropout factories do have common characteristics. There are low expectations. There's not enough adult engagement. I think so often at high school level, adults start to back off. Our teenagers need structure. They need discipline. They need somebody to care about them. And so you have to have the highest of expectations. You cannot let students fall through the cracks. And our teenagers are dealing with challenges that might have been unimaginable. There's more temptations. There's more pressures. We have to be with them every step of the way through thick and thin. And for all those challenges, we have other high schools that are 100% poverty, 100% minority, where 98% of students are graduating and 95% of graduates are going to college. So we know what's possible. We have to replicate those successes.
So the Obama administration, as everybody has mentioned, has given significant attention to this. $4.35 billion in the stimulus fund for education, a historic amount. Can you tell us what about Race to the Top will actually address the dropout factory problem?
So the biggest challenge in our dropout schools is low expectations. And I talked about many states have dummied down standards, reduced standards. Thanks in part to Race to the Top, we're now raising the bar. High standards, college and career-ready standards for every single child. 36 states have adopted these. They're not talking about them. They've become law. Having those higher standards, I think, is a threshold to telling parents and students the truth along the educational journey. Where are they successful? Where are they not? What are their strengths and weaknesses? If we're serious about closing achievement gaps, we have to close what I call the opportunity gap. And we have to be very, very thoughtful and creative about how we get the best teachers, the hardest working principals and teachers into underserved communities. Race to the Top resources can be used to get that phenomenal talent into those tough communities, inner city, urban, or rural. And what we're also putting on the table, in addition to Race to the Top, is school improvement grants, $3.5 billion to invest in these low-performing schools, not in the status quo, but in a very different vision. And so money is going to be a piece of the answer, but let me be clear. What we as a country have lacked, resources are a huge part of it, we as a country have lacked courage. We've been very complacent and just been content to see children of color fall by the waysides and not stepped in and said these children deserve better, they can do better, and we must give them those opportunities. That's what we're challenging the country to do.
You talk about lacking courage, and I guess the question is, what about the fundamental structure of how we fund our school systems? Nobody wants to talk about actually blowing up that part of the system, the local property tax tied to the local schools. Can you talk about that?
We have to talk about equity. And I always say, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. And we have just a fundamental decision to make in our country, and we heard a lot about tonight. We as a country quite happily lock people up at like 60 grand a year. Quite happily do that, no discussion on that. But we debate whether it's $10,000 or $12,000 or $13,000 to educate students at the front end. And so thinking about how you provide equitable resources at the local, at the state, and the federal level has to be a huge part of this conversation. We have to invest. And it's amazing to me that folks that say that resources don't make a difference, you go to any wealthy community in this country, they invest in education. Right. They do it. And in poor property poor areas where there's not as much wealth, those children get less money. I'll say one more thing. This one's really personal to me. When I ran the Chicago public schools, I got about $9,000 per child. The wealthier school districts 5 miles north of us had about $22,000 per child. Think of that every single year, the difference that makes from pre-K all through 12th grade. And money's not going to buy you excellence, but it sure doesn't hurt. And we have to deal with these issues openly and honestly.
With that, let's thank the Secretary for staying with us for a brief conversation.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
So I think we all know here, I know from personal experience from my family members and certainly that our nation is in the midst of the largest economic downturn since the advent of the Great Depression. We are in a deep hole. The weaknesses of the economy have caused the unemployment rate to soar, especially for African American adults whose unemployment rates today and even prior to the recession are roughly double the unemployment rates of whites. And the unemployment scenario for African American youth is actually at depression levels. We're talking about 45% unemployment rate for youth ages 16 to 19. That's absolutely unacceptable. There is no doubt that black families are hurting and that we need to take aggressive steps to address the pain. But we have to understand the root causes of employment disparities if the proposed remedies are to be effective and lasting. I just talked about how people of color, youth of color are our future. They will become the majority of the population in a few short decades. Frankly, our country cannot become prosperous if we don't invest today in the very children who will be, our economy will be dependent upon in the future. The labor market is incredibly important, and the link between education and employment is key. With that, we are pleased, very pleased today to have a very special guest, the Secretary of Labor, Ms. Hilda Solis. Secretary Solis was confirmed as the Secretary of Labor on February 22nd of 2009. Prior to her confirmation, she represented this 32nd Congressional District of the great state of California. In the Congress, the Secretary's priorities included expanding access to affordable health care, protecting the environment, and improving the lives of working families. She became the first woman to serve as to receive the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award in 2000 for her pioneering work on environmental justice issues. She also made history by becoming the first Latina elected to the California State Senate in 1994. She's a graduate of California State Polytechnic University in Pomona, and she is a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Southern California. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Hilda Solis.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, and buenos dias. It's good to be here with all of you, and congratulations to the CBC Foundation and all the folks that have a great deal of, how could I say, deserve recognition for your leadership for the past 40 years. I understand we're celebrating your 40th anniversary. So I want to just do a shout out to all of our friends in the community and across the country that have been strong advocates on behalf of the African American community and supporting your leadership here in Washington, D.C., and how grateful I am for having this opportunity to come and speak to you. Today's topic is educating our way to prosperity. And I can't tell you how important that is, because we know that right now we are going through some tough times. Part of my job, the first Friday of every month, is to report on what the labor statistics are for unemployment for that month. And all I can tell you is it has been a hard road, as you well know. And no community knows it better than the African American community. And some of us even knew it before it was technically declared a recession. And I say that as a former member of the House. I was a congressional member representing a section in Los Angeles that is also one that has gone through a lot of turmoil, East Los Angeles and the San Gabriel Valley. So I could tell folks maybe 2 years out before the recession was officially called, that in my community, we were seeing 9% unemployment. And that didn't make the headlines then, but I knew what people were going through in terms of not finding a job or not being able to have mobility in the workplace. They knew they had to hang on to whatever they had because there wasn't a lot of job growth at that time. So we saw things happening around the country even before this recession was declared. And I have to tell you, there's a reason why things have started to change now, because we have new leadership in the White House. Under this administration, this president has made it a point to address the financial crisis. And most people don't quite understand that. And I think it's true even for my own community. Because when he took over this office, you have to remember, we were losing well over 740,000 jobs a month. And we had already lost millions of jobs before that. Okay? So remember what he inherited and why we supported this change of this administration, because it was so sorely needed, because we knew that things were not being taken care of and being addressed appropriately. Therefore, you have members of the Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, and other good folks that understood what the president's vision was to help provide for immediate support, an interjection of support in our community. And part of that support comes through the Recovery Act, which I am involved in, through the Department of Labor. We doled out monies to states to provide that safety blanket for people that could apply for unemployment insurance. And many of our states here have benefited. Many of our constituents, many African American, many people who have been hard hit, were able to rely on that system of support. And that support had been expanded. When in our lifetime did you ever see an extension of unemployment insurance go beyond 26 weeks and even 99 weeks? That's unheard of. This president made that happen because he knew that we would need this interjection of support, funding for our states. Because if you come from a state like mine, California, you knew that they couldn't even tackle the coverage for unemployment insurance for many people that lost their jobs. Keep in mind, unemployment insurance isn't just something, it's not a welfare check, it's something you earn. You have to have worked in a system and contributed as well as the employer. And it's a system of trust that has been in place for many, many years. It's already 75 years old, but never in our lifetime has it been so expansive. And this president also provided a key provision in the unemployment program. He actually made it easier for state legislatures to get extended help for people who worked less than 40 hours, part-time workers. Now, how many of you here know that there are a lot of folk that don't work 40 hours a week? Some of it's deliberate and some of it isn't, because there isn't enough work. But that doesn't mean once that individual loses that job that they should not be able to draw down additional unemployment insurance that they should qualify for. Well, the President passed legislation to allow for that extension also for states that could conform to that law. And when times get better, then states have to restructure their unemployment trust fund so that they can continue to provide adequate coverage. Now, not all of our states are participating, and I would ask you, when you go back to your districts, to find out what state that is. And maybe we need to be taking care of business with some of our leadership, making sure that our governors are taking full advantage of monies that have been made available, that is there sitting, that can still be utilized. That's very important. So on the one hand, while the President has attempted to expand the safety net, not everyone has fully taken advantage of it. So that's something to keep in mind, number one. Number two, this is the first time that we have seen such an expansion in employment training programs. The Department of Labor, and I'm only one part of it. Keep in mind, you have Department of Education, you have Health and Human Services, you have Commerce, you have HUD, you have all these big agencies, some that have larger, 2-3 times the size of my budget. But my focus is on job training. I spent $500 million to help training dollars to go out to targeted areas that we could begin to start to transverse our workforce. I don't have to tell you, there's a lot of jobs that left this country that are not coming back. Even in the automobile industry, there has been a shrinkage, a contraction, right? We know this. We know a lot of friends that have lost their jobs because their businesses went bankrupt or they went overseas. That doesn't mean that we don't take time to step back and start projecting where our future growth and economic stability can come from. Where are those segments? Well, I'll tell you where those segments are. They're in healthcare. And they're not all the 6-year and 4-year career jobs, okay, which we need. We need more people of color in those jobs. But I'm telling you right now, we need more people getting in the upfront, the ambulatory care, the respiratory care, the people who work at the front office, but also, more importantly, some of the technical individuals. So there's a lot of folks that we could help retool that may have been working in another industry. They could have even been in the automobile industry who may now be thinking, I want to get into the healthcare arena. We are paying and subsidizing for that training. From my division alone, my department, $500 million. A lot of money went to different collaborative efforts deliberately spent in communities where we know there was hardship. In fact, of some of the monies that we gave out, about $150 million went out under the title Pathways Out of Poverty. And thanks to people like Congressman Barbara Lee and the Black Caucus, we were able to really, I think for the first time in the Department of Labor, focus in where the need was greatest. So we used criteria, new formula. It said, use the 15% unemployment as a marker. Well, you know who's going to fit there, right? That's our communities. So we were able to give an opportunity for individuals to apply for these grants. Naturally, we need more money to do more. And I hope that we can begin to address this as we start to move out and we begin to assess how our programs are operating. But there are many, I know of you in the room that have participated with the Department of Labor. Now, we also know that there's some funding that we can't change right away. Part of it is formula-driven because it's in statute, it's in the law. So we need to work with our Congress to change those formulas because those formulas are about 30 and 40 years old. That was a different paradigm. That population looked a lot different than it does now. And part of that is, I think, our calling to say that we need to be involved in changing the way formulas really address the immediate needs of our communities. So we do need help, we need input, and I look forward to working with the members of the Black Caucus so we can make these changes, because we have a long way to go. And all I have to tell you from what I know, the 8 years that I spent as a congressional member, believe me, it was hard to get amendments through, to get support, to start to address these issues. But now that we have the White House, we do have good leadership in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, now is a time to strike. Now is a time to be very diligent in making sure that we push our agenda. And I look forward to working with all of you, because I can't do it alone. I may be sitting there at the Department of Labor, but I need ideas. And sometimes those ideas that we had some 20 years ago that worked but never quite got off the ground, it's okay to bring them back, brush them off, maybe tighten them, make them more effective, but let's make sure they get to the right communities. And I think that's my message to you, that that's what I want to commit to you and to the American public, because there are so many people who continue to tell me that not everything has been clear for them, that this recovery may have some imbalances, but we're trying to address that as best we can. Now, I will tell you one thing. While I have to report every month about what the job report is, not too many of our friends, I don't want to say our friends, our foes, put it that way, aren't talking about the jobs that we added. For the last 8 months, we've actually increased private sector job growth, about 90,000 per month, for 8 months. Now, you don't hear a lot about that, but these jobs have been created in areas in manufacturing, I said healthcare, business and professions, and also in areas that maybe we don't even think about, in mining, in oil production, in the chemical industry. And these are the areas that have actually been able to survive. Now, we've invested a lot of money in new jobs as well. So many of the jobs that we lost, for example, in the automobile industry, we've now interjected money to create a new hybrid vehicle that Chrysler, remember, Chrysler and GM, yes, we gave them a handout, but they had to restructure. Now they're building a more efficient car. Well, guess what? We don't have a workforce that's ready to provide the kind of technical help to develop these vehicles. So we need people to stay in education, to get more training. We also need people to go to one of our websites that I want to mention briefly. It's called myskillsmyfuture.org. myskillsmyfuture.org. Simple. You lost a job, put your job in there that you had, look to see what training is available if you want to move up, and it will also tell you what jobs are available in your community. myskillsmyfuture.org. Please remember that. And I want to thank you. I could go on, but I know I'm being cut off here. But I look forward to working with you. And again, I salute all of you and look forward to be in partnership with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Secretary Solis, I just want to say, when she was in the Congress, she ran an empire from her office. And what wasn't only on behalf of working families, she was into health care, she was in the environment and everything. And we just want to thank you for being a champion of the people. Thank you. So with that, I am pleased to welcome our distinguished panel of experts for the second panel of this conversation. And I will introduce them in the order, and they shall come and be seated in the order in which I call their name. First, we have Brenda Dan Messier. She is the United States Assistant Secretary of Education. Welcome, Brenda. Next, we have Ms. Jane Oates. She is the United States Department of Labor Assistant Secretary for Employment and Training. Thank you so much. Next, we have our very special co-chair of the Congressional Annual Legislative Conference, the Honorable Diane Watson of the great state of California. Welcome. And we have our other distinguished co-chair, the Honorable Elijah E. Cummings of the great state of Maryland. Welcome, Congressman Cummings. And what would we be without the Honorable Shaka Fattah of the great state of Pennsylvania, the member of the House of Committee on Education and Labor? We're also joined by Ms. Phaedra Ellis Lampkins. She is the CEO of Green for All. Welcome, Phaedra. We're joined also by Mr. Wes Moore. He is a youth advocate, an Army combat veteran, a business leader, and he's the author of a new book called The Other Wes Moore. Go out and buy it. Dr. Charlene Dukes, president of the Prince George's County Community College. Welcome, Dr. Dukes. And Dr. Thomas Danny Boston, professor of economics in the School of Economics at Georgia Tech University. And we are so pleased to also be joined by Ms. Stephanie Owens. She is the Deputy Associate Administrator at the Environmental Protection Agency. Welcome, Ms. Owens. Now I'm going to set the terms of discussion up front here, and the terms of discussion are, there are no rules. I actually want engagement. This is a conversation. So I'm going to actually dispense with the 30-minute opening, and I'm going to go to a 30-minute close if we get there. But I think we need to get into the depth of this, okay? So we're going to engage up front. Let's get right to it. We know that our economy is suffering, that we're in a different era in our society. The global economy is very different than it was in the 21st century. We are now moving from an industrialized society to what some people are calling a knowledge-based society. So with that, I think I'd like to start with Congresswoman Watson. You are a premier educator. You have been at every level of the education system. Can you share with us what it means to be in a knowledge economy and what kind of skills the 21st century workers need in order to be competitive in this environment?
Well, let me just say this. It's important that you know what has occurred in this era. Under the last administration, we lost 750,000 jobs. And where did they go? They went overseas because business decided they should go over to China and India and places like that to have their goods manufactured by almost slave labor. So we lost our manufacturing jobs. Of course, when you put money out to fund a war at $15 billion a month, that leaves less revenue for domestic programs. So we were not able to send out to the states the kind of money to fund the education programs. Now, this is a high-tech generation. And what we need to do is have our schools prepare our young people in science and math to meet the needs of technology. And where are those jobs going to be? Those jobs are going to be in the green economy. So brilliantly, our president now has put up $77 billion to fund initiatives that will train people to work in infrastructure projects. See, we have to tie in the need with education. We have to fund our institutions. We have to be sure that every single person who is oriented, and we ought to see that they're oriented towards education, can cross that threshold when the door of opportunity opens.
Thank you, Congresswoman Watson. Congressman Fattah, the unemployment rate for African Americans is 16.3% compared to 8.7% for whites. That disparity has been consistent over time in terms of the unemployment rate being double the rate for whites. For men, for African American men, it's 17.3%. For black women, it's 13%. So my question for you is, why the huge racial disparities in unemployment rates, and what is the link to education?
Well, I think it's important to tie this to the first panel. I mean, when we look at the Obama goal of making sure that every child is prepared for college or a career, that's essential. A college degree in our society means about $1.5 million more over a lifetime of work than a non-college degree. So educating our young people produces an increased set of life choices and enhances their income over time. The disparities that exist and have existed for all of my lifetime, this is not part of the present recession. We've always had a higher unemployment rate, partly because of educational attainment, but also partly because our communities have been green-lined in terms of jobs. That is, because of race, we've had a barrier to employment that has been a fixture in our economy, and we have to understand that's why it's so important that we develop entrepreneurial opportunities, because the most likely place for African American men in particular to be hired is in African American owned businesses. So there's a direct correlation between developing businesses that are African American owned and operated and employment opportunities, and we can't disconnect that from this whole challenge. But you first of all have to present yourself at the employment door being employable. That is, you have to be able to do something that someone's willing to pay you to do. So you know, the ability to calculate and to compute and to communicate is as important today as the 3 R's were, you know, reading, writing, arithmetic at a previous time. What used to be the basic entry level into the job market, a high school diploma, is not the entry point anymore. An undergrad or some type of degree after high school, whether it's an associate degree or undergraduate degree, is really the floor. You know, Bill Gates said a year ago in talking about the dropout crisis, that he can't imagine a job where somebody's going to get a living wage and all they have is a high school diploma going into the future. I mean, people, so we have to raise the educational attainment level. We have to raise the entrepreneurial level in our own community so that we can be in a position of not just seeking jobs, but handing out jobs in order to deal with the differential.
So you raised an important point, and that is the issue. We've been talking about jobs, but you know, Secretary Solis just said there are certain jobs that aren't coming back. She said the fact of the matter is they're not coming back. So you mentioned entrepreneurship. You are also a champion for education. And so my question for you is, what needs to happen with the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act to bring our K-12 system more in line in terms of promoting entrepreneurial skills as a vocation, as well as skills that help people land jobs?
Well, to make it short and sweet, what we have to do is, first of all, we need to provide in our less performing schools what we provide in our high achieving schools. That's number one. But we also have to create an emphasis on entrepreneurship at a very early age in our community, in which we don't now do. We push our young people to prepare themselves to go to work in the private sector rather than to think about themselves as future entrepreneurs. And we need to take a much different approach. Milken came into Philadelphia and with the Wharton School set up a junior entrepreneur training program that has worked very, very well and excited a lot of young people about the possibilities and then for them the real prospect of going into business. In other communities, the notion of owning your own business is a common discussion at the kitchen table, and we need to make it so in our community.
So we have the Assistant Secretary for Adult Vocational Education here. And I'm going to actually transfer that question to you because, you know, a lot of people are talking about, you know, our schools are operating on like a 19th century model and that vocational education is a critical key component. Now, I know you focus on adult education, but could you also tie this notion of entrepreneurship and 21st century vocations to the conversation?
Absolutely, because I'm also in charge of career and technical education, and we need to make sure that we understand that that's not your grandmother's vocational education anymore, but it really is rebuilding that system to prepare our young people for high growth sectors, and that's really an important emphasis of career and technical education today. And entrepreneurship is very much a part of it. And also, as Congresswoman said, that we need to make sure that our students have employability skills, and so we embed those critical thinking, problem-solving skills into the career and technical aspects. So career and technical education is a very important part of this solution. We need to make sure they're not dead-end tracks, and so folks in the community really need to make sure that you're pushing the career and technical education system to train our young people for high-growth sectors. I also would like to make another point, if I might, and that we also need to be concerned about the educational attainment level of our parents and of our young people. There are 93 million adults in this country who have basic or below basic level, and we need to really focus on increasing their skills, because one of the determining factors of our children's educational success is the educational level of the parents. So I want to make sure we also focus in not only on our young people, but also their parents and increase their educational attainment levels as well.
Thank you for that. Congressman Cummings, I mentioned at the top of our conversation that the unemployment rate overall for African Americans is 16.3%. For African American men is 17.3%, and for black women is 13%. Why are black women doing better in this economy than black men, and what needs to happen in order to certainly close the unemployment rate gap for African Americans, but also address issues related to African American men?
I think, first of all, it's an excellent question. I want to go back to some of the things that Congressman Fattah was saying a few minutes ago. if you look at it, we have a situation where the dropout rate for African American men is far greater than for our women. And I sit on the Joint Economic Committee, and we get the statistics before everybody else does every month about the unemployment rates. And if you saw the difference between the person who has less than a high school diploma, college education, even African Americans who already have a high unemployment rate, they are less affected. The more education they have, the less they're affected by this recession. And I think that one of the things that we've got to do is we've got to make sure we figure out ways to keep our boys in school. And we've got to keep our girls in school too, don't get me wrong, but we've got to keep our boys in school. And we've got to keep them interested in school. And what I found is that I remember a few years ago I went to an elementary school, and they were some company had given them some computers, this school some computers. And I went and I visited the school, and the end of the day came. I came at the end of the day, and the boys were still there. And I asked the principal, what is this about? She says, well, they are learning to take apart computers and put them back together again. She said, I can't get them to leave. She said, I mean, literally, I cannot get them to leave. And I think we have to look at all of those kinds of things. Education is very, very significant. And so, you know, we've got projects in Baltimore where we want to hire from the local community. And sadly, a lot of our African-American men simply are not prepared to even start a job. The other problem that and I'm sure we'll address this, is that when we do a jobs fair, we had a jobs fair of 9,000 people. 9,000 people show up. And when I walk around the room and I talk to our brothers, many of them, sadly, and I'm sure Wes Moore will address this issue, have criminal records. And I'm telling you, it is something that has hurt us tremendously, because one guy came up to me, and I'll close on this, and he said, Mr. Cummins, man, you know, man, they're discriminating against me. This was at the jobs fair. They discriminated against me. I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, well, they want to know my background. I said, well, you know, what did you tell them? He said, well, you know, I said, well, who did you go to? He said, Wachovia Bank. He said, well, I said, what did you tell him? He said, man, I just told him I just had 2 robberies and a theft, you know, and he really, I mean, he was very upset about this, you know, and so, what I told him was, you got to understand that maybe 5 years ago, maybe there were 7 people with no record that was trying to get a job. Today, you probably got 300 with no record trying to get a job. So, you know, we've got to address that, and that's why I'm so glad that we have the Second Chance Act and some other things that we're trying to do.
Thank you, Congressman. I think you gave me a perfect segue to Wes Moore. And Wes, I read your book. It was fabulous. It read like a sociological study, that you actually dug deep into the life of someone else who has your name, but who ended up in very different circumstances than you did. Can you share with us a little about the book? Don't give it all away, but also I'd love to hear your opinion about how you think this prison to pipeline issue can be addressed.
Thank you. And the book, essentially, what happened was I received a Rhodes Scholarship back in 2000, and the Baltimore Sun, which our hometown paper, did a piece on my childhood and my life and how I had some issues coming up. But through a lot of help and support and mentorship, I was able to you know, kind of steer the path right. And I received this award. And thank you. Thank you. But at the same time, they were running a whole series on 4 guys who had robbed a jewelry store, and in the process of robbing a jewelry store, ended up murdering an off-duty police officer. Jeez. And there was a 12-day national manhunt for these 4 guys, and finally they caught all 4 of them. And one of the gentlemen who they caught and convicted was from the same neighborhood that I was from. He was around the same age as I was, and his name was also Wes Moore. And so as I was heading off to England on this full scholarship, the other Wes Moore was heading to prison for life, without parole. And the reason I've gotten to know Wes, and then you know, eventually decided to turn this into a project that really examines deeper, like, why does this matter, and how does this happen? How do you have 2 kids from similar backgrounds, similar circumstances, who end up in 2 completely different places? And this prison to pipeline issue is, the prison pipeline and the reentry issue is serious and it's significant, particularly when you consider the fact that over 90% of people in prison are coming out.
Right.
A very small percentage are there for either a very long time or for life without parole in the case of the Other West. So how are we thinking about that percentage that is coming out? And the fact that we have over a 70% recidivism rate in this country means that we have not fully come up with a fully baked plan on how exactly to examine this. I think when we think about this, there's two things that have to be factored in. One is this role of technology. And I think it was touched on earlier, but I just wanted to speak on it again, is the idea that, you know, the top 10 in-demand jobs in 2010 didn't exist in 2004. So it's important to understand how fast this job rotation is taking place, and if we're not able to keep up with the technological advances, we're not going to be able to compete. And you still have communities in this country that are essentially brown spots, that still don't have internet access, that still don't have, you know, computers inside of classrooms. All these factors have to be factored in. And I think the second very quick point is this whole idea of expectations. And I know Congressman Cummings and I were talking about this earlier, where I think we've got a plague that exists for so many communities in this country where we almost have this embedded low expectation of what we hope will be produced from these communities. And then it almost becomes this chicken and an egg concept where these communities don't produce because there's low expectations, well, there's low expectations so the communities don't produce. If we don't figure out a way to raise the expectations of all young people, regardless of what zip code they happen to live in, then it's amazing how young people actually will be these self-fulfilling prophecies. If you expect a young person to graduate and become a successful mother or wife or father or husband, then they'll do that. But if the expectation is that they'll drop out, if the expectation is that they'll be involved in the criminal justice system, then young people have a funny way of making that happen as well. So we've got to think about and shape the way we think about expectations for our young people.
And is that societal? Is it parenting? Is it schools? Is it everyone?
It's
all everyone.
It's all and also because one helps to foster the other. The expectations I have on myself have been because family and mentors and community leaders have instilled that in me. Therefore, they say, Wes, we expect you to do X, Y, and Z, so therefore I'm saying, well, I guess I'm going to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
If the expectation of me is that it's so low, that the bar is, you know, is so, you know, barely not even worth passing over, then it doesn't even make that journey worthwhile. I remember I was talking with one person about Wes and I, and he said, well, it's interesting because he said, it looks like you succeeded in accomplishing your expectations, and Wes didn't succeed in accomplishing expectations. And I said, no, I think the problem is that we both accomplished our expectations.
Wow. That's deep. That's deep. Actually, I actually want to push you on that a little bit, and that is to the extent that you got to peer into the life of the other Wes Moore. Do you think that the issue of, what do you think about the K through 12 system? What did he say about schools and his level of engagement? Was there nothing there for him?
Well, I think Congressman Cummings hit the nail on the head in terms of this idea of why is this relevant? I think you have a lot of young people who are coming up and they're going through schools and they're saying, okay, why is this even important? Why am I going through English classes? Why am I going through math classes? Why am I hearing my teacher tell me about homework when I have all these other things that I can do and other options, and they don't understand, you know, what is that light at the end of the tunnel? What is that long-term goal that I'm looking to achieve? And that's why things like entrepreneurial education become so important. Because if you can show a person, you say, listen, instead of spending $150 on Nikes every month, if you like sneakers so much, why don't you look at what it would take to actually create a sneaker company?
Right.
What does it take what's the cost of materials? What's the cost of labor? How do you build a board? How do you build a balance sheet? Think about that in that, because you have so many young people who are extraordinarily creative and they're curious and they're intellectually curious and they want to learn. So the question is, what are we teaching them, and how are we teaching them, and how are we showing them what's relevant in terms of their long-term development?
And the fact is that they are entrepreneurs on the street corner.
That's exactly right.
They are running businesses on the corner right now,
yeah.
And there's an opportunity here to actually direct it in another way.
Yeah.
Actually, you gave me a nice transition to Ms. Jane Oates, and you mentioned the need for increased technology. My question for you, Ms. Oates, is what do you recommend for mid-career individuals without the computer skills they need to be viable in this economy, and what should government do to assist in the skill building and training that they need?
Well, first I just want to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Moore for his book and to point out that the other Mr. Moore went to Job Corps, and according to the book, it was the most promising point in his life. We just let him go. So my commitment is to make sure Job Corps holds on to those kids and gets them on a better track, so he could have been competing with his namesake here in a positive way. But I think the IT skills are a real issue. Look, I think for folks that are long-term unemployed, when you're talking about 17% of the workforce, the African-American male workforce being unemployed, the best way we can teach them IT skills is to put them on the job to learn those skills, to let them get paid while they're learning those skills. That's why we're so delighted, especially with the House and the Congressional Black Caucus, that they gave me the flexibility to use some of my National Emergency Grant money this summer to put out in on-the-job training. I don't think you can tell an adult about IT. I think you have to show them the relevance of that IT on the job, and to keep them engaged, you have to pay them while they're doing it. So I hope that we'll have great stories to tell, not only the caucus, but the Congress, so that they would look at this dusty old model of on-the-job training, just like this dusty old model of apprenticeship. You know, understanding that in the world of apprenticeship, we are going to have to work with due diligence to make sure that our registered apprenticeship folks that run the programs are committed to not only letting people of color in, but actively recruiting in communities of color to get them into apprenticeship programs. I think OJT and apprenticeship are the two models that work for IT and other things to get adults the skill base that they need and pay them while they're learning that.
And unions are an incredibly important part of this apprenticeship equation, right? Yet we know that there's been a historical issue with regards to African Americans actually getting those apprenticeship positions in the unions. And so, I mean, is there any way that government can help facilitate and open those doors so that more African Americans can get opportunities in that direction?
Well, first, I think it's important to have those conversations even when African Americans aren't in the room. It's important for your non-African American leadership to say diversity is a priority in apprenticeship programs. I think that it's easy to pander when the community is in the room, and I think those discussions, Secretary Solis has been leading those discussions. We've had great discussions with labor. I think when labor said to me when I first came on, we can't find people with the skills necessary to go into those apprenticeship programs, I completely retooled Job Corps and Youth Build so that young people would have, every person graduating from Youth Build and Job Corps has a pre-apprenticeship certificate, meaning they are job ready to go into an apprenticeship program in the field in which they studied. Now we're doing that same thing with our adult training programs. My feeling is that organized labor said they couldn't find people. I take them at their word. Now that we're finding the people for them, we hope that as those jobs come back in construction, that they will be taking those folks. But we're not stopping there. Employers have to do the same thing. Utility companies are good employers in every single community represented in this room. And yet workers at utility companies are disproportionately white, even if they're in areas. I grew up in Congressman Fattah's district. I'm from Philadelphia. Even in Philadelphia, black workers are not equally represented. In a town that's majority minority, they're not in those utility companies. And we're working to change that, not only so there can be line people that are of color, but CEOs in those utility companies that are of color as well.
Very good. I just got word that there is a possible vote coming up, so we've got the 3 Congressman members here. What I want to do is give you your 30-second close in advance. So any message you want to send home that's important for this conversation, love for you to start, Congresswoman.
I think you mentioned diversity, and we've got to push that concept. I represent Hollywood, and you have programs that play on a daily basis, and you see no diversity within the cast.
Right.
We have to start there. So I have a program within the district that trains diversified youth behind the cameras. There will always be a job there if we can keep them producing films within the Hollywood area. We're taking on a phrase in our caucus saying that you can make it in America. 2 meanings. You as an individual can succeed in America, and you as a business person can manufacture in America. Now, we have to see that America's youth are ready to cross that threshold. So we really need to emphasize, and I'm glad we started with the educational panel first, getting our young people ready. Attitudes are so important. We need to see that our men within our homes and our communities are there supporting their children. Responsibility of our parents is something we have to emphasize. We want that diversified market, and we want people of color, all colors, to be part of it. But we've got to start in our homes, with our families, with our neighborhoods, with our communities, with our schools, and then with our employment base. So I want to leave that thought. Diversify and be sure our youngsters are ready to go into that diversified market.
Thank you. Congressman Cummings.
Yes, as we leave, I want us to, when we put this panel discussion together, one of the things that I said is that I wanted it to have some practical results. In other words, there are people in this audience right now who don't have a job. You don't have to raise your hands, you just wink at me. And there are other people who are worried about keeping their jobs. And if you don't fall into one of those two categories, you've got a relative or somebody close to you who you thought would have never lost a job. What I'm hoping that as the panel discussion continues is that we will try to figure out where the jobs are so that we can begin to direct our people in the direction of the jobs. Keep in mind, for example, we just passed legislation that all of us voted for, by the way, to add some 32 million people to the insurance rolls. Somebody's got to do that work. Somebody's got to take care of those folks. I don't want our people, when that bill comes in and it's in motion, and we're going to make sure it stays in full force, I don't want us standing on the outside looking in and not being able to take advantage for those jobs. Like Dr. Rockymore said, a lot of these jobs that people are in and they're losing, they're never getting back. So we've got to change our mindset and say, okay, where are the jobs? Are they health area, the green area? And I'm sure our panel will discuss that, come up with some, I know you will, practical solutions, and so that people can move out of here with some kind of information whereby they might be able to act on it and pass it on to other people. But again, I want to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Congressman.
I think, just to have a frank, candid discussion, just between us. First things first, we got to make sure that our young people take full advantage of getting as much education as humanly possible. They have to have, like Mary McLeod Bethune said, a thirst for education that can't be quenched. I mean, so the schoolhouse door is open, and we need to have our young people be first in line. We have a habit of being first in line at the complaint window. We need to be first in line at the claims counter. There's an opportunity to get an education, K to 12. There's community colleges. There's historically black colleges. There are private colleges. There are Catholic colleges. There's Jesuit colleges. There are all kinds of colleges, right? And there's vocational education. So the first level of this is people need to be prepared and be employable. And then attitude is important, job readiness, being willing to come to work on time, do the work, right? And the other side of this is that the jobs that can't be outsourced. Right. When there's a plumbing problem at your house, you can't outsource. There's somebody right there who's going to come do that work, right? An electrician, a carpenter, somebody to do. So this is where the vocational training is. And even if you have a record, if you can have your own plumbing shop.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So we have to, if somebody knows something about locks that they might have learned on one side of the line, they can be a locksmith on the other side of the line. We have to resist this notion that somehow, when we talk about the dearth of opportunities for African American men, we have to, Jawanza Kunjufu said, we love our sons and raise our daughters. We need to be more candid and more frank. People who want a job have to do the necessary preparatory work. They have to be in a position to do something that someone is going to pay them to do. That's right. And they have to come with the attitudinal adjustment, maybe, that they're not going to be the boss overnight. So we just have to be more candid with our sons about the responsibility, to go to school, stay in school, learn as much as they can, and then as they go into the workforce, not just look to, you know, I got a friend, and I'll close with this, who owns almost all the McDonald's in Virginia. He used to own a group of McDonald's in Philly. He had to sell them so he could buy a larger parcel. It's a big difference between working at McDonald's and owning McDonald's.
That's right.
So we just need to focus our aspirations a little higher.
Let's thank our Congress people. And I'd like to go directly, actually, to the conversation around community colleges. And Dr. Dukes, what role are community colleges playing in certainly meeting the workforce needs of employers and retraining the workforce?
Well, you know, first I have to certainly thank you and the members of the Congressional Black Caucus and the Foundation for recognizing the pivotal and critical role that community colleges can play as we talk about skill training, higher education, and job creation and development. I think it's so important. And I would tell you that on community college campuses, we have both Westmores. We have those young men and young women who have all kinds of support. They are smart, they are articulate, they know the direction in which they want to go, and they are focused on getting there. And then we have those other West and maybe Westina Moors who need all kinds of wraparound services, who need support, and what they just need is someone to expect them to do the right thing. And once we put all of that together, then community colleges are no longer that singularly focused institution that maybe we were 100 years ago when we were founded as junior colleges with the purpose of transferring to four-year institutions. We are comprehensive institutions that focus on partnerships with K-12, both public and private, pre-K through 12 education. We're talking about partnerships with four-year institutions, but most importantly, partnerships with business, industry, offering career and vocational training, job development, and job skills.
So how are community colleges actually adjusting to the economic recession? Are you seeing any trends with regards to changes in employers' training needs?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Are you seeing any trends with regards to changes in the trends with employers' needs?
Oh, there's no question in regards to the trends relative to employer needs and what they're expecting. They are expecting, much like the congressman said, that people can come in whether they are on a four-year track or workforce development. They're expecting people to come in and understand what it means to work on a team, what it means to go back to those 3 R's of reading, writing, arithmetic, reasoning, calculating, being at work on time, understanding the skill level that you have and being able to put that skill level to work for you. It is also about understanding what the new markets are. If we talk about computer information systems and technology, if we talk about green jobs and what it really means to have a green job, and I know that we will have panelists who will answer that question, but it's also about teacher education and how we make sure that it's middle skills as well as higher order and higher thinking skills.
So we've heard this morning, I guess the question now is where are the jobs at? And we've heard this morning Secretary Solis mention healthcare is where it's at. And certainly Congresswoman Watson mentioned first, and as Dr. Dukes, green jobs. Miss Phaedra Ellis-Lampkins, can you tell us what are green jobs? Where are they, and how can people get them?
I have to say, when I first heard about green jobs, I thought it was a hustle. Because I'd be like, I don't know anyone that has one of those jobs, so tell me where they are and what they look like. And so part of why I came to the organization Green for All is because I wanted to find out where were these jobs and how did people I know get them. Because in a lot of the communities I'd grown up in, we would see these big construction projects come on, and then we wouldn't see anyone we knew working on them. And it seemed like there was an opportunity because we looked at, I came out of the labor movement, and a lot of us, benefited in what you called essentially a manufacturing-based economy where we actually made things with our hands and we created them, we were part of a production cycle, and we all had jobs that you could get a high school diploma and go to work in a factory. Then what happened is we changed to kind of an IT and information-based economy, a high-tech economy, where we used knowledge and information instead. And what happened is all our folks weren't part of that economy. And now we're changing to another form of economy, which is essentially an economy where we have to create our own forms of energy. Does anyone doubt that the price of gas has gotten higher? Do you doubt that your community does not have the same quality of air? And so part of what we're figuring out is that we have to figure out, do we want to be an economy that imports batteries and water from China? Or do we want to be an economy that creates things? And so a green economy is essentially figuring out, how do we create our own forms of energy? How do we reduce our pollution so that we can compete with the rest of the world, because there'll be less natural resources? And so the question for our community is, do we wait while we watch other people create these jobs? Are we the beginning part of the economy? And what's happening in places like China is they're in a race to create the economy. They've stopped using coal, they've started doing energy efficiency, and they are doing it because they're creating more jobs. In this country, a green job is essentially something that either reduces pollution and increases a new form of energy and has a job. We at Green for All focus on what we call green collar jobs, which are jobs that have a career path. So if you start out, that you continue to increase your wages over time. That's what it is. Now, where are these jobs? A lot of these jobs are in places we already know people who work. They're in transportation. What's changed is the Obama administration's put a significant investment in things like high-speed rail. So we're going to see additional investment in transportation. We're also going to see things like, thanks to the work of Administrator Lisa Jackson, who her team is here today, we'll see things like changing and investment in infrastructure and water. So in our communities, where all of a sudden soda is cheaper than water, we're going to begin to see an investment in making cleaner water, and we're going to have to figure out how to be part of that cycle. So the question is, how do you get these jobs? The first thing we have to do is we have to do policy like the Congressional Black Caucus did, and something that every person has to walk out. And I want you to repeat that you hear this, because if you don't, no one we know will be going to work. I want you to say construction careers, okay?
Construction
careers. The reason that's important is because right now, the administration and our tax dollars are investing a lot of money in construction. And what we have to figure out is, how do we guarantee that a percentage of those jobs go to people in low-income neighborhoods and people who are surrounded by the construction? I have to say this to you. I've been in this movement for 13 years. I've never had a fight like construction careers. The idea that we think that people that live in communities should have those jobs. And the reason you have to know that name is because when you see investments in your communities, if you don't go and say, we want local hiring, we want to make sure that those are good quality jobs with good benefits, with retirement options, then our folks won't have jobs. The best example I want to close with is a place called Portland. Portland is not the most diverse city in the country, you may know, but what we've been able to do is, through those policies that we're now doing at a national level, half the people working on those projects are women and or people of color. Why that's significant is because the project is more diverse than the city. So when you look at urban areas, when we know there are policies that can guarantee that people we know get good jobs, we have to be at the beginning of this economy saying, we want those jobs, and we want, what do we want?
Construction careers.
Exactly. And so we want to be able to say those things. So you'll look at water, you'll look at transportation, you'll look at manufacturing, which will see a new growth, but we're going to want to see construction careers. And why it's important is because not only do we want to see people working in those places, but we want to see them creating those opportunities. In a city like Portland, there were 0 minority contractors. Now there's 2 of 20. We'll move to 4 of 20. That's all in less than a year. So when we know innovation is possible, it's our job to create it at a national level.
Ms. Owens, you're at the Environmental Protection Agency. You have an environmental justice portfolio. Why is the issue of education and jobs critical to what you do?
Well, I'm going to start by first thanking the members of Congress that were here and those from the foundation, because one of the things Administrator Jackson has focused on since she took hold of the Environmental Protection Agency as the first African American to lead that agency in January 2009 was to begin to expand the environmental conversation and work for environmental justice. There is a disproportionate effect in low-income and minority communities of environmental degradation, and that is a trend that she has vowed to turn back. One of the challenges that we have is that everyone's not talking about the environment. Now, there's a focus on green jobs, but actually working in the environment, understanding climate change and understanding the impact that the environment has on the economy is a disconnect that our communities are making. And there are consequences to that disconnect. It's not just about the fact that 52% of all of the jobs that are going to be created in the future are clean jobs, are in the clean energy sector. But it's also that 59% of every commercial and residential building was built before 1980. So all those buildings are going to have to be retrofit. And the work that we do at the Environmental Protection Agency to tighten air quality, to tighten the water quality laws has a direct impact, actually, on some of the work that people will vow to do. Does anyone in the audience know anyone who's a painter? Anyone know any painters? Do you know if your painters know about the recent EPA regulation as it relates to removing lead-based paint? And if they are an entrepreneur, and they are a painter, and they are trying to get this huge contract from any entity, public or private, but they aren't certified, that's not their job. They're out of the supply chain at that point. If you know architects, and they aren't LEED certified, or they aren't aware and they don't have the information and training as to what it takes and what it's required to be a LEED certified architect, engineer, to be a landscape person who knows how to plant plants in your lawn that can offset climate change. If you can't do that, then that might not be the job for you. So this focus on the green jobs goes from light green to dark green. There's certainly a lot of money in research and development and innovation for new projects, products that relate to clean energy technology. At the same time, so many entrepreneurs and individual workers are falling out of the job force because they are not staying current in their skill set as it relates to be a part of the green economy in that supply chain as someone who supplies products or is in some ways engaged in working toward these elements that contribute toward a green building, a LEED certified building, a climate controlled landscaping area. Now, I didn't answer your question. I want to go back to environmental justice.
Actually, I'm going to have to ask you to do it in your closing remarks because we have to get Dr. Boston and we're running out of time.
Perfect.
Dr. Boston, Bob Herbert ran a column, I think the day before yesterday in the New York Times, where he basically pointed to the statistic. He was actually referencing Robert Reich's new book, which talks about how the richest 1% of Americans have gotten even richer over these past several decades, while middle class and working class Americans have been basically stagnant and actually reversing. So in the context of the situation with real wages and the percentage of the American income that's going to the upper 1% of Americans, is everything that we're talking about here, I mean, is it realistic, and how can we actually drive an agenda that gets beyond that stark reality?
Very good. Well, my question to you is, you saved the economists for last. Does that mean you like us or hate us?
I love you. It's just that I overlooked you at the beginning. I was trying to play it off.
Okay. Let me answer your question real quickly and then put it in perspective. But first of all, I really like this panel because it talks about all of the various aspects that have to be addressed in order to attack the issue of jobs. And as an economist, I've studied the economy for 30 years, and I've operated a business for 15 years, and when I say what I'm going to say, it comes from that background. First of all, there are a couple of facts. Fact one is, even if the administration had $1 trillion to put into the economy to stimulate it, the unemployment rate for African Americans would still be above 10%. All right. There's a problem. We have to deal with that. Now, years ago, I asked an economist, Ray Marshall. He's probably the first white economist who did detailed studies of African American labor market patterns, and former Secretary of Labor. I said, Ray, in all of your studies, when we look at things, we look at issues like discrimination and institutional barriers and other kinds of things. I said, Ray, in all of your studies, what do you see as the fundamental issue that's affecting African Americans in the labor market? He said, well, Danny, what I see is that blacks are always an increasing percentage of declining industries, right? Very, very profound, because that's, in fact, a fundamental issue, and we have to talk about how we can reposition ourselves. Now, to the question that you asked, this skewness in income, it's happening because of where we are positioned in the labor market, and unless we address that in regards to retraining and through the community colleges and others, that skewness will continue to exist. If you look down the road, say 25 to 50 years from now, much like today but even worse, one of the things that will be true is the fact that the only job you're going to be able to count on is the job that you create yourself. That an increasingly larger percentage of the workforce are permanent part-time workers and contract workers. Now, that creates a challenge, but it also opens an opportunity. And the emphasis on entrepreneurship is very important because it is more entrepreneurship and self-employment are more accessible today than ever before. And so we have to make the connect that bring people together with the opportunity to start a job and become self-employed. And I'll just simply close by saying this, and that is, and here's another fact, in national studies of every individual in the workforce, what we found is that the ethnic group with the highest proclivity to become entrepreneurs is African Americans. There's no group in the country that has a higher interest in being an entrepreneur than African Americans, yet we're at the bottom, right? So we gotta make that transition and make that desire translate into reality, and there are ways now that can happen, much more accessible than in the past.
Thank you. We're now going to move into our speed round, and this is going to be the 30-second closing remarks, but because we ran out of time, there are certain things I want certain people to say. So, Dr. Dukes, I really want you to address what community colleges are doing to help prepare people for healthcare jobs, because we heard that Secretary Solis mentioned that healthcare is a wave of the future. But for all our panelists, I want to make sure that we actually provide people with the names of the programs and the resources that they can go to help certainly themselves and their family members get a handle on this economy and get opportunities that can give them more economic security. So I'm going to actually start with you, Ms. Dan Messier.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for inviting me here today. I want you to know that the United States Department of Education, under the leadership of Secretary Duncan, is really working very hard to strengthen our adult education system. It's also working very hard to strengthen our career and technical education system, because we know that that's a way to engage and re-engage our young people, because it's hands-on and relevant, but it has to be rigorous and tied to high-growth industries. And I also want you to know that we're working very closely with our community college partners to make sure that students not only enroll in community colleges, but they complete, so that we can meet President Obama's 2020 goal. I'm very happy to come into the communities and talk more specifically about the various programs that we have and ways that communities can access all the programs and services of the Department of Education, and offer that as a way to partner with our members of the community.
Resources, websites?
We have certainly our ed.gov website that lists all the resources and programs that are available, and people can access that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Oates?
I'll give you the website first. This year we developed a new tool for folks who are out of work called My Skills, My Future. MySkills.myfuture, all one word, .org. It allows you to put in your last job that you had and access other jobs that require similar skills, where you can get those jobs in your zip code and within a mile radius that you put in from your zip code based on your transportation accessibility. And if you need additional gap filler training, it tells you where you can get that training and how much it costs within that same distance. While all the discussion today I ditto on improving K-12 education, it is critical that when you go back to your communities, you make sure that you say it's never too late. Even if you made the wrong decision about pursuing post-secondary credentialing when you were 18, it is not too late, because all of us are going to be working well into our 70s. So make sure that everybody knows that education is not just for young people anymore.
They're laughing at you. I'm not working into my 70s. Right? Ms. Ellis-Lampkins.
I always like a bit of optimism. Thanks, Jane.
And it's so long ago, and in your future, you won't even...
Yes, sister, thanks.
Baby.
Good looking out, yeah. First, I want to give you our website, which is www.greenforall.org. That's greenforall.org. And if you ever need to reach me, it's my name at greenforall.org. The reason that's important is because on our website, there are materials that tell you first how to access government money. So if you're an individual, where are their job training programs? If you're an entrepreneur, how do you actually access recovery funds? In addition, we have monthly calls with folks. Our last call for entrepreneurs had 1,500 people on it because people are desperate to figure out how to access some of these resources. Also a community of practice around energy efficiency. So think of Green for All not only as a movement. If you're going to a Drake concert or Black Eyed Peas, you might see us there. But more importantly, how to get a job in my community movement, that you can find that information, myself or our team, if you want to be connected.
Wes.
Very quick question. How many people in the room, either in the job that you have now or in a recent job, you got it through a referral, someone told you about it, someone gave you an idea that this is an industry you might want to start taking a look at, myself included? The reason why I say that and why that's important is this. Networking, mentoring, volunteering is incredibly important when you think about job perspectives and job opportunities. Mm-hmm. If you have a chance, go out and if you're unemployed or you have time or whatever, if you find a community organization that you care about, that's doing good work, that you believe in, I'm doing work currently with, I'm not sure where Diane is, but with the U.S. Dream Academy. You find organizations that you believe in and you start working with them. Not only is that good for the communities that you're hoping to serve, but it's a chance for you to network. It's a chance for you to meet people. It's a chance for you to broaden your horizon in terms of the people that you're getting to interact with. And the vast majority of jobs that are found in this country are not found through classifieds. They're found by someone referring you. They're found by someone talking to you. Someone saying, you know what, I heard this job is opening and I think you'd be a great person for it. Why don't you go talk to so-and-so? So by opening up our network, it's a great way of doing it. In terms of resources, in the back of my book, The Other Westmore, I actually list over 200 organizations, volunteer organizations around the country that are on the ground doing the work, that are on the ground helping and supporting communities all over the country. These are all organizations that would love to hear from you if you need help or if you want to help. So increase your network, and it's a great way of actually increasing your job opportunities as well.
Thank you. Dr. Dukes.
Thank you. And I would suggest to you that all of you live in communities where there is a community college. Go to their websites and determine what it is that they're offering that can help you, your family members, or your neighbors achieve their dreams. When you talk about healthcare, it's one of the fastest growing occupations and career fields in this country, across this nation, across this world. And it's not just about direct service in terms of registered nursing, radiation therapists, nuclear medicine, respiratory therapists, physician's assistants. It's also all of those ancillary services that surround healthcare. Visit Prince George's Community College's website and just type in Prince George's Community College, and then type in the quick links, the Center for Minority Business Development. Through a $5 million grant, we were able to create a center that helps budding entrepreneurs realize their dreams. And we'd like to help you, if we can, realize your dream if you live in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, or refer you to a similar kind of program in your own community. We're very happy to be here, and we're very proud that we will join with other higher education institutions in meeting the Obama challenge and the Obama promise to the citizens of these United States of America.
Dr. Boston?
Yeah, the world today rewards creativity and intellectual property like never before. 20 years ago, if you asked what's the largest company and can you compete with it, that would have been General Motors and GE and the rest of it. It would have been impossible because of the capital barriers. Today, it's Google, and how was it formed? In a garage, right? So that it's accessible. All you have to do is be creative enough to do that. And when you think about self-employment and entrepreneurship, don't necessarily think about a big company. Just think about a way to make money to supplement what you're doing, or either to make that a full-time occupation. It's important. You've got to give yourself that opportunity to have an option, because the likelihood of you being able to retire from a good job, even if you have it today, is very, very slim. That's and then secondly, in terms of websites, of course, you can always go to sba.gov, information on starting a business, operating a business. There's the Kauffman Foundation, kaufmanfoundation.org. Tremendous information on entrepreneurship, all kinds, from micro enterprises to others. And then if you will wait until late November, my company is going to launch a new website, which is called gazelleindex.com. And I will promise you, it will give all of you an opportunity to start the business of your dream very, very easily. We've worked it out, so look for that. It's gazelleindex.gov.
Spell it? She has to spell it.
Gazelle, gazelleindex.com.
Gazelleindex.com.
Right.
Thank you. Ms. Owens.
Thank you. I would remind you that the earth is a finite resource, and the environment impacts each and everything that you do. I would encourage you to become familiar with the environmental impacts of the work that you do, to understand how it encourages you to be better or how it might be a hindrance to your growth and development. I will point you to the EPA website, epa.gov, and ask you to search for two particular programs. The Brownfields program, which has a grant program for training in various communities, and I believe that grant program goes live in November. Is that correct? I would also encourage you to search for environmental education, where we have a series of $5,000 grants available to any nonprofit, community-based organization to begin to seed the conversations about expanding the environmental conversations in your own backyards.
Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. I've been given a housekeeping note, and that housekeeping note is that all conference registrants are asked to swipe your electronic business cards before select sessions. These cards were distributed at the registration desk, apparently. The information collected will help this Congressional Black Caucus design their sessions next year. Please visit CBCF on Facebook and Twitter, and there will be live blogs and interactive features designed to engage the community and expand the dissemination of vital information. Let's thank our panelists again for this wonderful conversation, and thank you for coming to this very important discussion.
I want to make sure I get your card.
You did a wonderful job. Thank you very much.